new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות i24 News.
i24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
i24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, i24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on i24 News.
Hello and welcome. You're watching i24 News, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. Fierce fighting in northern Gaza, Rafah and in the West Bank as the IDF says it's killed dozens of Hamas and Islamic Jihad operatives. Iran warns it will obliterate Israel if it invades Lebanon to destroy its proxy Hezbollah. And 750,000 people are at risk of imminent starvation in Sudan as the RSF militia now controls almost all of Darfur. Well, those are our top stories at this hour. First, though, the IDF says it has killed dozens of Hamas fighters in the Shajaiya neighbourhood of Gaza City. Tanks rolled into the area Thursday afternoon and issued orders for civilians to evacuate. The IDF has also moved deeper into Rafah in what's being seen as the final stages of this phase of the war. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will continue fighting until all of its objectives are met.
Our forces are operating in Rafah, Shajaiya, everywhere in the Gaza Strip. Every day they're eliminating dozens of terrorists. This is a difficult struggle that is being waged above ground, sometimes in face-to-face battles, and it is also being waged underground. We are committed to fighting until we achieve all our goals: the elimination of Hamas, the return of all of our hostages, ensuring Gaza does no longer pose a threat on Israel, and the safe return of residents in the north and the south to their homes. To anyone who doubts the achievement of these goals, I say again, there is no substitute for victory.
Well, joining us now, Dr. Harel Horv is head of the Middle Eastern Network Analysis Desk at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. He's also a Palestinian affairs expert. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Harel. Good to see you again. Let's start with what's happening in Shajaiya, the neighbourhood of Gaza City. Is what is happening there key to the wider aims of this war?
Well, I think it provides us a model or a case study, if you will, of how the IDF works against Hamas operatives. Shujaiya was already occupied about half a year ago. The IDF left. And from the evidences that I've collected after, soldiers described it as a boring neighborhood. Namely, they did the job. However, half a year after, it probably channeled a lot of the refugees or operatives that become refugees and channeled them into a new framework that Hamas is trying to reestablish. And now the IDF is destroying this new framework. And this is exactly how things will look like in other areas. By the way, Laura, we saw the same kind of pattern with Jabalia. In Jabalia was generally the same kind of a case, and at the end of the day, it will finish.
So can we imagine that IDF troops will have to go back to this neighbourhood again and again, as and when the threat presents itself?
Well, I heard just a few weeks ago a very interesting testimony of one of the Nahal brigade commanders, and he said, you know, we've returned to this place 4 times, but each time that we return, we find a weaker and weaker Hamas. So this is basically the meaning of mowing the grass. So basically the answer is yes, but what kind of Hamas would they leave after they leave the area? And we need to take into account the advantages of in this kind of fighting, because it doesn't basically leaves our soldiers as sitting ducks in those areas, but they return once they have enough intelligence, enough information about the regathering of Hamas, and then they surprise them and hit them.
Well, similar to the situation in the West Bank for many years now, I want to talk about what's happening there as well. We have seen a significant rise in activity there. An Israeli airstrike today, killing Saeed al-Jabbar. This was a senior member of Palestinian Islamic Jihad who appears to have survived several assassination attempts in the past. Can you tell us a bit about him as a figure? Was he important?
Yes, it was important. He is part of the Islamic Jihad infrastructure in the northern Samaria area, a place where the Palestinian Authority is quite weak, or I would say ineffective, actually. And this is exactly why the IDF is required to go there again and again, because the Palestinian Authority tried to take things under control for many times. The last time was, I think, 2 years ago, June 22, but reluctantly. And in this case, the IDF needs to do the job by itself to prevent what we call the Azatization of the northern Samaria.
Okay, Dr. Horv, thank you very much. Stay with us, if you would, because it is not just the Islamic Jihad operating in the West Bank. Hamas is also growing in support. There are top Hamas official calling directly on West Bank Palestinians, including members of the Palestinian Authority security forces, to carry out attacks against Israelis. Hussam Badran called on every person in the West Bank who carries a weapon, officially or unofficially, to fulfill his responsibility, because every person with a weapon in the West Bank can make a difference. Well, let's bring in Dr. Nasir Al-Amari. He's an independent writer and political commentator. Thank you very much for being with us, Nasir. Good to see you again. And after 9 months of war, Hamas is still fighting. It's still calling for attacks against Israelis. How is that being interpreted in the Arab world?
Thank you for having me, Laura. Well, if you watch Al Jazeera, they focus on the resurgence of Hamas in Shuja'iyah. They talk about the resilience of the resistance. They ignore the details of what's happening to the civilians, and they focus and they feed the followers of Hamas and the Arab street with stories of resistance and trying to inspire everybody to believe that there is an actual war and Hamas is actually threatening Israel. So the Arab street has actually bought into the fact that Israel can be fought in Gaza and elsewhere indefinitely or for a long time and weaken Israel. This is the narrative according to Al Jazeera, and it's widely accepted in the Arab world that there is an actual fight and the Palestinians are actually winning.
Meanwhile, a new report shows that more than 100,000 Gazans managed to get out of Gaza and across into Egypt via the now closed Rafah crossing. What is life like if you're Gazan in Egypt?
Well, it's basically hopeless. Many of them don't know where to go. Some of them hold Jordanian citizens, but other family members were not allowed to come to Egypt because they don't hold a Jordanian passport. They are sitting and waiting. They wonder how life is going to be in Egypt if their stay is extended. So again, this is a considerable number of Palestinians who crossed into Egypt. And this is not discussed and talked about because Egypt doesn't want to appear to be a country that is helping Israel evacuate the Palestinians from Gaza.
Let me bring in Dr. Horv. Harel, just today, the Israeli government renewed cooperation between Israeli banks and Palestinian banks. That was due to run out this month, as I understand it. If it had run out, it would have hit the Palestinian economy pretty hard, wouldn't it? Is this enough, do you think, to head off economic disaster? And what does this mean for the Palestinian Authority?
Well, it was for quite a long time the issue of renewing, for example, the permits for the West Bank workers, something around 60 to 70,000, nobody really knows, was a crucial issue regarding what should Israel do with it after October 7th. Personally, I recommended many times, and others as well, and as well as the security establishment, to renew those permits and to let the Palestinian work in Israel, despite of the understandable sense of threat and after October 7th. But still, I think at the end of the day, what we might lose, both of the people, because of escalating the economic situation in the West Bank, is much more visible in this kind of policy of preventing them from those permits.
All right, Harel, Nasir, stay with me for a moment, because we're going to turn our attentions to the north. Sirens have been blaring across Israel's northern communities throughout the day. Our correspondent Robert Swift is with us now. Rob, what's happening?
So we've actually fallen into a little bit of a lull in between activity. There was a burst of activity for over a course of about 2 hours ago, where there was multiple sirens going off. Now, the most recent incident was about an hour ago, where Metula, the community which you can see behind me, had 3 anti-tank missiles fired at it, one of them striking a building. A little bit earlier, about an hour earlier to that, there had been a drone warning going off again in Metula. This one, the IDF has since commented on, saying that this was a false alarm. This being the second false alarm to take place up here in the northern communities at this end of the border today. But it's worth bearing in mind that while the IDF does have its work cut out for it with the difficulty in detecting these weapon systems that Hezbollah is sending across the border, it has been able to correctly identify several. A little earlier in the day, 2 hours ago or so, a bit further to the east of us, there was at least one drone, if not more, crossed the Lebanese territory into the upper Golan Heights, with the IDF saying that one drone did fall and explode in that territory, although no damage and no casualties in any of those incidents. But we have been hearing sporadic artillery fire and what sounds like explosions on the far side of the border in Lebanese territory, as well as a lot of IDF aircraft patrolling, especially over the area of the Golan Heights, and that's likely activity related to Hezbollah's attempts to send these drones over the border.
Meanwhile, Rob, let's zoom out a little, because, of course, there is a great deal of anticipation all across the region that an all-out war could break out any day now. Our colleague Matthias Imbar is reporting that Western intelligence sources have told him that Hezbollah is asking Iran for funds and manpower, because they are in trouble because of all the attacks that Israel has carried out against its members. Do you have any updates on that at all? Any more information?
We don't have any further updates on that, but we can put that information in the context of what's taking place here. There have been multiple different indications and warnings from various different sources, warning about the possibility of a war sparking. It's understood that European intelligence sources are even more concerned at how rapidly the situation here could escalate than their US counterparts are. And with regards to Hezbollah asking for reinforcements, rearmaments, I think there's 2 ways to look at that. One would be that this could be an impact of Israel's ongoing attacks against Hezbollah, with the casualties starting to stack up. Just today, Hezbollah announced 3 more casualties, likely caused by IDF airstrikes earlier. But the second way to look at this would be that prior to an escalation in a conflict or the outbreak of war, it's very common for militaries to rearm, to rush in new supplies and reinforcements to positions where they need them. Hezbollah has pretensions of being a real military, a full-scale army, and so it would not be surprising if it were to act in a similar way. So these could be an indication of casualties on their side, or they may be an indication of preparations for a larger-scale conflict.
All right. Rob, thank you very much. Robert Swift there up in the north of Israel. Well, Saudi Arabia has joined a growing list of countries ordering citizens to leave Lebanon amid fears of a war between the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah and Israel. But at the same time, Egyptian media reporting that the Arab League just quietly decided to stop referring to Hezbollah as a terrorist group. Let's bring back Dr. Nasir Al-Omari. And so, Nasir, is it true? And why would the Arab League do that now?
Well, the Arab League is not exactly Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan, who are no friends of Hezbollah. You also have the likes of Algeria, you have the Assad regime, and you have the Arab Street, who views Israel now as a real threat, while Hezbollah looks more like he's actually standing up to Israel and asking Israel to stop the attack on Gaza, to stop its own attacks on the northern border. So politically, it's important for these Arab regimes to look like they are on the side of the Arab Street, who is definitely on the side of Hezbollah and on the side of Hamas. However, let's put this in context. The context is the United States, in the eyes of these Arab regimes, has not done enough to contain Iran. Iran is stronger today. It's selling weapons to Russia. Its economy is integrated with China. It threatened Saudi Arabia, and the United States did not go to war. Actually, it's taken pride in not going to war. So these regimes are moving in the direction. We have seen the Saudi crown prince welcoming the Assad regime back into the Arab fold. And today we see that these Arab countries are not sure how the United States would act if a war breaks out between Iran and its proxies and Israel. And therefore, they want to appear like they are on the side of the people who are definitely anti-Israeli because of what's happening in Gaza.
Oh, interesting. Thank you, Nasir. Harel, does it make any difference to Israel where the Arab League stands on Hezbollah? It took, of course, a long time to persuade the Europeans that Hezbollah is a terrorist group. Is there a concern in Israel that some of the more moderate states are deciding you can't fight Iran, you might as well embrace it and its proxies as well?
No, I think Dr. Al-Omari explained it very well. It's basically a diplomatic approach. It was, Hezbollah could be designated as a terror organization while it was supporting Assad regime during the civil war, when it was instrumental for many of the Arab League members to designate it as a terror organization. And at the moment, it doesn't serve the same goal, so they can, skip it. As for Israel, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter regarding its informal connections with those countries, with Saudi Arabia, with the United Arab Emirates, which is probably the best friend of Israel today at the Arab world. And most of the job and most of the messages are being conveyed, under the radar. And I think in that sense, Israel is not so concerned.
Nasir Al-Omari, where does the Palestinian Authority President Muhammad Abbas fit into all of this? He's been somewhat missing in action, and in recent weeks we see the West Bank up in flames. What is his relationship like with the rest of the members of the Arab League, and where is he put in terms of the future for the Palestinians?
Well, he's lurking in the background. He really doesn't have anything to say other than condemning Israel. However, at some point, he believed that the U.S. was serious about bringing him back after reforming the Palestinian Authority, and that was probably pushed by Egypt and Jordan. So Abbas and the Palestinian Authority believe that they can probably play a role at some point. But for the time being, Mahmoud Abbas doesn't want to appear like he's conspiring against Hamas when the Arab street believes that they're fighting Israel. So I think they believe remaining quiet at this point is in their interest.
Dr. Nasir El-Omari and Dr. Harel Horv, thank you very much indeed to you both. Well, meanwhile, the United States reportedly trying to kickstart hostage negotiations by rewording the proposal on the table. 120 people are still being held in Gaza, and last week Prime Minister Netanyahu was severely criticised for implying that he would accept a partial deal to get back some of the hostages. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has this report.
As more and more of Gaza turns into rubble, a potential ceasefire for hostages deal between Israel and Hamas is hanging by a thread. In the latest attempt to bring Hamas to agree to the deal currently on the table, the Biden administration has reworded part of the proposal, according to the Axios news site, focusing on the negotiations between Hamas and Israel in the first stage of the deal, setting the conditions for the second of 3 stages. On Saturday, Hamas denied seeing any significant changes in the deal.
There has been no real progress at the end of the aggression negotiations. And what is quoted by the American administration is to put pressure on Hamas to accept the Israeli ceasefire proposal without modification. It's a way to beautify the image of this ugly administration. Once again, Hamas is ready to deal positively with any proposal that secures a permanent ceasefire, a comprehensive withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and a serious swap deal.
Hamas insists that any deal must end the war with a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Israel says that cannot happen, and its goal continues to be to fully remove Hamas's governing capabilities in the Strip. After all, Israel can't accept another October 7th massacre, it says. An attack that Hamas has said it will repeat until Israel is eradicated. On Saturday night, tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets once again in a repeated, desperate attempt to get the Israeli government to reach a deal with Hamas, to bring back the hostages, and to call for early elections.
This morning we learned that the Biden administration is taking action to renew the hostage deal negotiation. The one thing standing between us and our loved ones is Netanyahu's stubborn insistence to not end this war as a part of a deal. Continuation of this war means the murder of the hostages by Israeli's government. The blood is on your hands.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel supports the ceasefire for hostages deal that's on the table, and that the ball is now in Hamas's court. Over 120 hostages are still believed to be kept in Gaza.
Now, Israeli media is reporting that an El Al plane that took off from Warsaw had to make an emergency landing in Antalya in Turkey earlier and is now being prevented from taking off or refuelling. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Dr. Sinan Sidi, a senior fellow on Turkey at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Thank you very much for joining us, Sinan. And first of all, can you confirm for us that the plane has been prevented from leaving, and if so, why?
So it defies reason. As last I checked, it seemed as though the plane was permitted to take off, but it's had to sort of stop in another country now for refueling purposes. There is no explanation at this point in time as to why they prevented the plane from A, being refueled, and B, allowing passengers off the plane. I understand that the person who was reported to have a medical emergency may be receiving treatment, but it defies reason and basic human decency as to why a plane should be refueled on its way back to its home country after making an emergency landing. It's pretty vague so far, so we're still waiting for what the government authorities are going to say. But one of the other things I read was one of the actual airport employees that's responsible for refueling planes said he flat out refused to provide fuel for the plane.
Right, and is this being covered at all in the Turkish media?
I haven't seen this actual particular item making its news as of now. So presumably, the mainstream media that's close to Erdogan is either sort of damping this down or essentially just wanting to ignore it. Basically, they're not seeing it as something significant. And even if they do report it, they're going to probably likely cover up this notion of that they've refused to provide the plane with fueling rights.
And it wasn't so long ago you could get on a Turkish Airlines flight from Tel Aviv and fly to Istanbul. Those flights have been scrapped, I think, until March 2025 at least. And of course, President Erdogan cancelled all trade ties with Israel, a pretty significant trade relationship. Is this just the latest step in an ever worsening relationship?
So, correcting all those observations, I mean, the Turks have lost out big on essentially, allowing Turkish Airlines flights to operate direct flights between Turkey and Israel. That's impacted, obviously, Turkey's tourism industry. Turkey's general stance, or the Turkish government's general stance to sort of take a severe anti-Israeli position on the world stage has also hurt its commercial reputation. But more than this, I think it should be said this. I mean, the emergency landing is a humanitarian issue, right? You clearly have a person on board that requires medical treatment. Otherwise, the plane wouldn't request it, because the distance from Warsaw to Tel Aviv is not that far. And that's one thing. And it should be remembered that it was only in February 2023 when Turkey experienced its most devastating earthquake in its entire history, leveling 10 cities, killing tens of thousands of Turkish citizens. Israel was one of the first countries to respond to Turkey in its darkest hour, and sent field hospitals, relief teams, rescue dogs, and rescued countless Turkish citizens without even batting an eye for what was happening in the political realm in between the governments of the two countries, because it was a fundamental humanitarian and human issue, right? The fact that the Erdogan government is choosing to play politics over this is just absolutely flies in the face of decency.
I mean, President Erdogan, from the beginning, he's embraced Hamas. More recently, he embraced Hezbollah. He says Turkey would be on the side of Hezbollah should there be a war with Israel. He's compared Prime Minister Netanyahu to Hitler. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, are these positions supported by most people in Turkey?
You know, Turks are broadly sympathetic to Erdogan's position on Israel in the Gaza war. What Erdogan has done is basically sort of amplify that to the 10th degree by sort of essentially really really toning up his divisive and horrific rhetoric that's gone beyond just criticism of what Israel is doing. And this plain example is just the most recent sort of exposure of that, right? Presumably there are people on that plane, I don't know the passenger manifest, who are not Israeli, right? Who are just foreign nationals on a plane, maybe taking a trip to Israel or to Tel Aviv for business or pleasure or whatever.
Yeah.
If one of those people got seriously sick or injured, who's going to be responsible for that, for not rendering aid to people in their time of need?
Absolutely. Dr. Sinan Sidi, we appreciate it. Thank you. Time for a short break. Stay with us.
world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels, now on Hot.
Welcome back. A so-called moderate and an ultra-conservative have made it to a runoff vote in Iran's presidential election. Neither Masoud Pezeshkian nor Saeed Jalili won enough votes to be declared the outright winner. Sources inside Iran say that turnout stood at around 40%. That's lower than the clerical regime had predicted. Our Middle East correspondent Harel Horv has this report.
The votes are in as Iran heads for a runoff in its presidential elections.
None of the candidates managed to win an absolute majority of the votes. Therefore, the first and second candidates with the highest number of votes will be announced to the Guardian Council.
Friday's second round will see little-known reformist Masoud Pezeshkian square off against hardline former nuclear negotiator Saeed Jalili. The first round came down to a tight race, with Pezeshkian securing 42% of the votes, compared to Jalili's 38%.
Election day is a time of great joy and excitement for us Iranians. The people's vote will shape the country's future for the coming years. The longevity, stability, reputation and honor of the Islamic Republic depends on the people's participation.
Khamenei hoped for a high turnout to boost his regime's legitimacy, but instead got a record low, 39.9% voter turnout, the lowest in the history of the Islamic Republic. Pezeshkian will need to draw more voters to the polls on Friday in order to contend with Jalili, who's expected to get the votes of the other hardliner candidate, who finished third, Mohammad Khalibaf. Pezeshkian will need to prove that he is more than just another government-approved candidate.
God willing, we will try to have friendly relations with all countries except Israel. Hijab is something that we need to address, according to the law, but no inhuman or invasive behavior should be made against our girls, daughters, and mothers.
Power in Iran ultimately lies with the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, with the president running the country's day-to-day. And so the results of Friday's runoff aren't expected to bring any major shift in Iran's policies, from its nuclear program or its network of proxies across the Middle East. But a victory for Pezeshkian could influence, if only slightly, the tone of Iran's policies and perhaps also tensions with the West. But Jalili's win would signal an even more antagonistic turn in the Islamic Republic's foreign and domestic policy.
And Iran has ramped up the threats towards Israel and says any invasion of Lebanon would trigger what it called obliteration. Well, to talk about all of that, we're joined by Ben Talablu, Senior Fellow at the FDD, the Foundation for the Defence of Democracy. It's good to see you, Ben, as always. Let's start with the election then, because turnout was being touted as a key marker of how much support there still is for the regime. We don't have an official figure, I believe, but was it lower than the clerical regime had predicted?
It's a pleasure to be with you. In essence, yes, it's been much lower than the regime predicted. You had some semi-official polling talking about high 40s, low 50s, which would be, again, game-changing given the trend in the past decade that we've seen in the rise of street protests, as well as the rise in the boycotts of elections, whether they're parliamentary elections, Assembly of Experts elections, or even presidential elections. The election that this round was supposed to replace, which was former President Ibrahim Raisi from 2021, he had the lowest ever record for presidential election turnout. Now that's been surpassed by this first round here. And in the second round, if you had to ask me, this will be the regime engineering something to continue its hard right drift and consolidating power, where a high turnout doesn't buy you legitimacy, it buys you deterrence. So that's why they're trying to tout a higher turnout than may actually be reported.
Right, and we're now on the brink of a nail-biting second round runoff vote with a lot of suspense. We've got an ultra-conservative on one side and a so-called reformist on the other. Is that a coincidence?
I don't necessarily see it as a coincidence, and sometimes with the Islamic Republic past this prologue, the regime's hardline factions and deep state establishment has often tried to use the prospect of a hardline candidate winning to generate more turnouts, to give the Iranian people the allegation or the potential thought that they can actually indeed change things with participation through the ballot box, even though that hasn't happened. And then the government will use that higher turnout in round two to signal legitimacy, to bolster deterrence, and then continue to drag the system to the hard right. That is exactly what happened in 2005 with the first time that former Holocaust denier-in-chief Mahmoud Ahmadinejad entered the presidency. So in that sense, past may quite well be prologue here.
What about Masoud Pezeshkian then? And there's been a lot of articles, profiles of him in the Western media. Is he truly a moderate? Could he bring some sort of reform?
You know, these labels are very much relative, but if you look at his views on the United States, you look at his views on Israel, and you look at what he's trying to do, as well as what he can do within the confines of the governing system of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that person will not be able to make substantive changes, whomever the president is. And in this sense, a lot of the hyper-focusing on the bios of the candidates and the puff pieces on the legacy of someone like Pezeshkian just tells you one thing. The Islamic Republic has always been able to narrow the political system such that yesterday's moderate, yesterday's hardliner is today's self-styled reformist. And that's exactly what the political contraction that's been happening behind the scenes, and then sometimes quite publicly with disqualifications of people like Larijani, someone whom the Western media had likened to the Kennedys of Iran, tells you about the governing structure in the Islamic Republic. So this tells me more about the West's over-focus on certain things and misunderstanding of the things that matter in the regime.
OK, let's talk about these latest threats then out of Tehran. Complete obliteration if Israel moves into Lebanon to fight its major proxy, Hezbollah. How do you interpret those comments?
You know, Hezbollah, which is to Israel's north, is not all like Hamas, which is to Israel's south, even though they all fit into the regime's larger axis of resistance strategy, which, as we've seen both pre and post October 7, is designed to politically and, more importantly, militarily inflict a death by 1,000 cuts policy against the sole Jewish state in the region. Hezbollah is really the crown jewel of these proxies. And what Iran is likely to do in attempts to surge and defend this crown jewel of its proxy architecture is probably drastically different than what it will do and has done thus far to defend Hamas, which is probably the lowest of the low-hanging fruit. Hezbollah was created by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps amid the chaos of the Lebanese civil war, whereas Hamas was co-opted among the different fighting strands of the Palestinian movements in the 80s.
Ben Taleblu, thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Now, analysts are warning that the Islamic State group, or ISIS, is at its strongest in years, and neither Americans nor Europeans seem able to stop it. There's been a spike in attacks in Syria, while in Mosul, in Iraq, once the heart of the ISIS caliphate, the UN agency UNESCO has had to stop work on an historic mosque because it found a stash of ISIS explosives that were planted there years ago. Well, to talk more about all of this, we're joined in the studio by our Middle East correspondent, Harel Horv. And Harel, let's start with Syria, because, of course, there was a Western-backed, US-backed Kurdish force which managed to push the ISIS fighters right back and take away a lot of the territory that they had controlled. They've been complaining for years, haven't they, that they don't get enough support. What is the situation now?
The situation now is that both in Syria and also in Iraq, in former areas of influence of the Islamic State, ISIS, there are sleeper cells that continue to operate and take advantage of the lack of governance in those areas. In Syria, you have the Assad regime that doesn't control all territories of the country. And you also have in Iraq, you have some areas that also the government doesn't have full authority over. But in general, a very weak central government in both those places that is being taken advantage of by these sleeper cells that continue to operate in both countries. They are more successful in Iraq. They are conducting continuous operations against security forces there. And for instance, in Iraq, where you have a diminishing cooperation between the central government and American forces that have been the backers of this war against ISIS that began over a decade ago, you find yourself with this reemergence that we have been talking about over recent years. Every once in a while, there's another wave. These sleeper cells can manage to raise their head above water, but at the end of the day, after 7 years after they were declared stateless, we see that the Islamic State continues to cause trouble for the governments in Syria and in Iraq.
Oh, well, that's in Syria and across the border in Iraq. Mosul was at the heart of the caliphate a decade ago, and the city was all but destroyed by the Western coalition forces who were fighting ISIS. There's been painstaking efforts to try and rebuild this beautiful old mosque, the Al-Nur Mosque, that was all but completely destroyed, and we've just heard that they found ISIS weapons inside.
Yeah, the UNESCO found 5 substantial explosive devices hidden in the southern wall of the prayer hall of this mosque. Now, this isn't just any mosque in Mosul. We're talking about perhaps the hallmark mosque of the Islamic State, where its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, announced the establishment of the Islamic Caliphate in the area. He did that 10 years ago yesterday, and so there's a little significance in terms of the timing. According to UNESCO, one of the bombs of the explosive devices that were found was dismantled. The other are going to be dismantled in the coming days. But this just shows another reminder as to not only the devastation and destruction that ISIS caused, but also how their presence continues to pose danger not only to the locals who are trying to rebuild their lives and move forward, but also to the central governments, and in this case also historical landmarks that were taken over by ISIS, destroyed by ISIS, and now the world is trying to pick up the pieces. But this is a reminder that that task is not easy and smooth.
Quite, Iraqis and Syrians were the biggest victims of ISIS brutality. But most worrying for the Europeans is that they're now really establishing a foothold in North Africa, usually Al-Qaeda's stomping ground. But ISIS is really growing in force there as well, isn't it?
Well, you see these, you call it global jihad groups, really taking advantage of, some could say, lack of governance, others can say lawlessness, running free in some of these areas in northern Africa. For instance, Libya is one example where this lawlessness has enabled such groups to thrive. At the end of the day, we are not seeing, if we saw a consolidated coalition working together a decade ago to fight ISIS, that is not the situation today. We are seeing more local efforts to try and thwart these, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Al-Qaeda, these emergence of global jihad. But in the absence of a unified, cohesive effort to uproot these different elements, the local governments are finding it very challenging to do so themselves.
Ariel, thank you very much. Sudan's civil war is raging on meanwhile, with a new warning from the UN that as many as 750,000 people are now at imminent risk of starvation. The paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, continue to advance and have taken control of the army headquarters in Sennar State, putting that city under siege. The RSF now controls most of the Darfur region. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Monim Haroun. He's the advocacy manager at the group Hayas Israel. Thanks very much indeed for being with us, Monim. Let's start then with the humanitarian situation, which you've spoken to us about in the past, but it does seem to be growing worse daily, doesn't it?
Yeah. Hi, Laura. Thank you so much. And thank you for covering this important issue. Yes, the situation in Sudan, and especially the humanitarian situation, is getting worse every day, as you said, and is warning of a serious disaster that is going to happen. Is through the millions of people who have been displaced due to the armed conflict. And also, the rainy season is coming in Sudan, and with the destruction of the infrastructure in Sudan, such as hospitals, it making the situation even more worse, with most of the hospitals out of service, access to basic needs becoming almost impossible, and also the rainy season would make the movement of refugees within Sudan almost impossible. So it's not only that the famine is it's threatening the Sudanese in Sudan, but also the diseases that could come up as a result of lack of medical treatment, hospitals, and due to this rainy season that would bring malaria and cholera for the people in Sudan. So the situation is really, really concerning.
Yeah, the country appears to be on the verge of collapse, and you've got the RSF, this paramilitary force. It seems to be advancing unchecked. Why is no one able to stop them?
Yes, actually, unfortunately, the country is collapsing, and I'm afraid that if no serious action is taken by the international community, in 1 year, we might be in a totally different scenario where you have over 20 armed forces acting on the ground in Sudan and in total collapse of the state. With regard to this advancement of RSF or the Rapid Support Forces, there are two main reasons. One is that I think in the last 10 years or in the last 15 years, the RSF were the only the only armed forces acting in the ground in Sudan, tackling the rebel forces in Darfur and in the southern part of the country, and also being involved in Yemen fighting the Houthis group in Yemen. So in that manner, they are more fit, they are more equipped than the Sudanese armed forces, which make it more difficult for the Sudanese armed forces to tackle the rapid support forces. The other reason is that actually there is no incentive. There is no enough pressure from the international community. There is no robust action by the international community.
That's what I wanted to ask you, because Sudan, of course, is a member of the Arab League. What proposals does the Arab League have to stop this? What about the international community? Where is the UN? Why are we not hearing any proposals to end this conflict and save millions of people?
Great question. Thank you for that. I think the Arab community, yes, Sudan is part of the Arab League, but I think the Arab League is sort of divided when it comes to the crisis in Sudan, as some of the members of the Arab League are supporting the RSF and others are supporting the Sudanese armed forces. And I think the complexity of the situation in Sudan makes the Arab League not to take a clear position on this conflict. And I think it's also because there are so many other crises that are going on internationally, which make the UN focus less on Sudan, but more on Ukraine and the crisis in Israel and Gaza. So it seems like just the international interest doesn't seem make the conflict in Sudan a priority, which I think it's a huge mistake, because Sudan has a very special and unique geopolitical position in which the extension of the conflict in Sudan might impact and affect other countries in the region.
It certainly has the potential to destabilize the whole region, doesn't it? Absolutely. Monim, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much. Great to talk to you. Monim Haroun.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
Now, tributes have been pouring in following the death of Princess Lala Latifa, the mother of the King of Morocco. She was 78 years old. Princess Lala was the widow of King Hassan II and the mother of the reigning King Mohammed VI. Well, to talk more about that, we can go to Morocco. We're joined by Dr. Mohamed Shtatou, political analyst and senior professor at the University of Rabat. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Shtatou. And first of all, our condolences to the people of Morocco. Can you tell us a bit about Princess Lala, the king's mother? Was she a major figure in Morocco?
She was a very secretive figure, but she was very known for being very nice, very kind with poor people, helping people. And she was also very religious in the sense that she built so many mosques around the country and was instrumental in helping the poor people all over the country. So people keep a very good memory of her.
I understand she was a member of Morocco's ancient Amazigh community. What does this tell us about the role of the Amazigh people in Moroccan society?
Well, the Amazigh people in Moroccan society have a very important role because they are, in many ways, the aborigines of Morocco. They've been around for over 10,000 years, living in the mountains now, and they have a very strong and very rich culture. So it was a custom in Morocco that every king would marry a Berber woman, so there is a kind of union between the Arab people and the Berber people. And this tradition was carried on by the late Hassan II, so that he kept Morocco a very unified country. So that's, in a nutshell, the story of Lala Latifa, and she became the queen, in a way, the queen of Morocco, though she didn't have the title, and she's the mother of the present king.
Will there be a long period of mourning in Morocco now? Is this something that everybody takes part in?
Could you say that again, please?
Will there be a long period of mourning, of grief for the Moroccan people now? How does it work when there are these large events with the royal family?
Well, in Morocco, there is also a tradition that when royals die or princes die, it's kind of private action, in the sense that it happens within the royal family. There is no mourning. There is no official mourning in the country. But people are talking about her, obviously writing articles and remembering her. And this is how the mourning is carried on and the grief is expressed.
All right. Well, once again, our condolences to the people of Morocco. And Dr. Mohamed Shtatou, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Now, imagine growing up as a Muslim in the Turkish city of Istanbul, only to convert to Orthodox Judaism and move your entire life to Jerusalem. Well, the journey of one painter is exactly that, and she's just put on her first exhibition right here in Israel. Our Emily Francis has her story.
With every brushstroke and burst of color, Turkish-born artist Leah Gül reveals her inner world and the curves of her life's journey. Now living in Jerusalem for the past 3 years, Leah is showcasing her prolific work for the first time in Israel at Tel Aviv's Zoa House.
Actually, that's one of the first pieces of this collection, which I made in Turkey. It came out in a very difficult times of my life. So it was a point like, before life and death, and just trying to get out of that pit.
Leah was born and raised as a Muslim in Istanbul, and even comes from a noble family dating back to a major shift in Turkey's history in the 15th century.
My mother's side is coming from Karamanlis family, which we have on paper that 12 generation back it's written. So I raised with those stories. The beginning of the Republic, how my grandfather was a commander of one of the castles, so he fought with Ataturk.
Leah went to school with Jews and always felt a connection, but couldn't put her finger on it at the time until she faced a turning point in life.
At year 2000, I had a very big car crash. We were going with a group of friends to an amazing opening, and a very big truck hit from my side. We turned, I don't know how many times, and we came out alive from that car, which was, after all, I thought it was a miracle. So after a while, I started to think, why didn't I die? I should have died from that accident. That question leads me to some spiritual question.
And she found the answers to her spiritual questions in the Torah.
And one day when I was in Amsterdam and Frank's house, something I felt very strong. So at the exit to the guest book, I wrote it, I have decided to convert.
And in 2005, Leah became an Orthodox Jew after going through a challenging conversion process.
When you believe in something very strongly, doors open wide open with God's help.
A process depicted in her exhibition called Unmasked Before the Forces of Creation.
The name is creation also of the painting. I was so affected and deeply, and every time I read the first book of Torah, the Bereshit, it's again, I do another painting in my head. It's a fight of Esav and Yaakov's fight, like struggling with the good and bad inside. It's what we experience. Each of us has good and bad inside. And every day when we open our eyes to the new day, that good and the bad borns again with us.
Leah, who was also a successful artist in Turkey, immediately caught the eye of well-known curator Galit Zimbalist, who was blown away at first sight.
It was like escaping to a different reality. The door was opened. I saw a beautiful lady, very delicate. Her eyes were so gentle, you could see through her soul. It was like she was pulling me into a mystical world that wasn't familiar to me.
A mystical world depicted with layers of colors and secret messages immortalized on the canvas. In Tel Aviv, Emily Francis, I-24 News.
Fascinating artwork there. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Middle East Now. Many thanks for watching, and we hope you've enjoyed the show. Do stay with us on I-24 News. Benita Levin is up next with tonight's rundown. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye.
Aplauden cuando yo lo presento. No es cierto. Ok. Y ahora sí.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
today's program, Benjamin Netanyahu vows to achieve all Israel's war goals, including eliminating Hamas, returning all the hostages, ensuring the terror group no longer poses a threat, and bringing evacuated residents back home. We've got the latest updates as fighting continues in Shejaiya in Gaza. Why is the Hezbollah terror group asking Tehran for massive injections of money right now? I24 News brings you an exclusive update on communication intercepted by Western intelligence sources confirmed by Israel. We go live to northern Israel for the latest. And it's being described as one of the most consequential debates in U.S. history. What steps will the White House take, if any, after President Joe Biden's worrying performance against former President Donald Trump? Can the 81-year-old president complete a possible second term? We speak to an expert and look at the implications for Israel. Welcome to the Rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine, standing in for Kalev Ben David. Benjamin Netanyahu is today reiterating that Israel will not end the war until it's achieved all its goals. The Prime Minister conducting a situational assessment of the war in Gaza, visiting the Southern Command headquarters on Sunday, stressing that there is no substitute for victory and, quote, "Our warriors did not fall in vain." This message coming as the IDF pushes ahead with its offensive in Shejaiya neighborhood of Gaza, where at least 40 Hamas terrorists have been killed. 268 days since the Hamas terror rampage and mass abduction in southern Israel, the retaliatory ground operation is said to be winding down. 120 hostages are still in captivity. No confirmation yet as to how many of the hostages are alive. And there is still no sign of a ceasefire hostage deal, amidst reports that the US is changing some of the language in the proposal. And Hamas is insisting that the war come to a complete halt. Here's the latest message from the Israeli Prime Minister.
Our forces are operating in Rafah, Shejaiya, everywhere in the Gaza Strip. Every day they are eliminating dozens of terrorists. This is a difficult struggle that is being waged above ground, sometimes in face-to-face battles, and it is also being waged underground. We are committed to fighting until we achieve all our goals: the elimination of Hamas, the return of all of our hostages, ensuring Gaza does no longer pose a threat on Israel, and the safe return of residents in the north and the south to their homes. To anyone who doubts the achievement of these goals, I say again, there is no substitute for victory.
And now for an update on the ground. Our correspondent Shani Guidalia from our sister French channel was in southern Israel earlier and filed this report.
The IDF operates for a few days now in the Shejaiya neighborhood, that is in northern Gaza Strip, that is right behind me. And this operation is expected to last several weeks, according to the IDF. So now in Shejaiya there are intense fights. During the afternoon we heard dozens of artillery fires. Another one right now. We also saw a lot of smoke coming from the area, and I have to say that the IDF surprised Hamas in broad daylight. In only 40 minutes they entered and they took control of Hamas headquarters that were inside a pharmacy and inside a UN school. And then when they entered in this UN school, they found Hamas terrorists that were hiding. They also found dozens of weapons, and they also found a lot of intelligence documents. But so far, this operation in Shejaiya seems to be more about destroying tunnel networks that remained undiscovered until now, that the IDF missed during the first operation in Shejaiya. And it's important to say that over the recent months, once the IDF withdrew from the area, then Hamas has been reconstituting itself. So now this is the fourth reinvasion of northern and central Gaza since mid-March. The first was in Al-Shifa hospital, the second in Jabalia, the third in Nuseirat, and then the fourth now in Sajaya.
That update from our correspondent Shani Gudalia from our sister French channel. She was updating us there from southern Israel. And now for more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital, former commander in the Special Forces in the IDF, and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here with us on the rundown. And I want to start with you, Doron, because as we were hearing that update from Shani earlier on in the day, you could hear the explosions behind her, the artillery fire. It sounds intense. Your take on exactly what is unfolding right now inside the Gaza Strip?
I think this is what we call the first stage of the campaign in Gaza. It means that in some sense, we broke the military capacity, some of the military capacities of Hamas, but still we are waging a guerrilla warfare with Hamas. They're using this infrastructure of tunnels, and she did mention that one of the aims of those incursions, those raids into Gaza that the IDF is conducting, is really to find those infrastructure and blow them up, because this is what enabled the guerrilla warfare that we are so much worried about. The idea in the end is that we will phase out of the Gaza, still maybe hold the Netzarim corridor that separates the north and the south of Gaza, hold some capacity in Rafah and Philadelphia route, and do those raids that are based on intelligence, trying to target leadership, trying to maybe rescue operation, and tunnel infrastructure and weapon ricochet, which is very important for us to dismantle as we go. Of course, what is open still, hostage deal, and of course, the issue of the day after. What do we do with Gaza in the day after? Who replaces Hamas?
So many questions still remain on that front. We are hearing still, when we look at the updates, Ariel, of what is transpiring out of the Gaza Strip, weapons seized from another UN school during one of the raids. This happens with increasing regularity. What's being made of these updates out of the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, this is another example of Hamas using UN sites. This time it's a school. They are operating with the understanding that Israel will not target these structures, whether it's schools, hospitals, other UN facilities, taking advantage, cynical advantage of these sites which are considered protected under international law. However, once they are converted to military use or there are attacks conducted from those sites, they are no longer protected under international law, and this is for Israel to prove that this is the case while they attack them. So Israel providing the world another example, more evidence as to the cynical use of Hamas of protective sites. Again, this time a school, and in some of these sites they have been not only weapons caches, but there were even tunnel shafts built into these areas. This isn't the case in this specific school, but it has happened before in the Gaza Strip. And so this is not the first time the IDF is announcing or exposing cynical use by Hamas of sensitive civilian infrastructure. And unfortunately, it won't be the last, as the IDF's campaign against Hamas continues in a more pinpoint, intelligence-based raids, as opposed to maneuvering. Significant maneuvering is what we saw up until now, the transition from the second phase to the third phase, as Doron was describing earlier.
It's still staggering when one thinks of the millions of dollars that have been injected into these terror tunnels, this infrastructure in schools, and as you're saying, Ariel, in other civilian so-called infrastructure. Gentlemen, stay with us. We're turning our attention to another part of the region. IDF Special Forces have today conducted raids in the northern West Bank, gun battles breaking out in the Farah camp. Israeli troops also conducting a rare drone attack on terrorists in Tulkarem. So I'm coming straight back to you, Ariel Osaran, on exactly what is transpiring in the West Bank at the same time as we're talking about this fighting in Gaza winding down. What can you tell us?
I think if we look at the West Bank in comparison to the other two active fronts Israel is engaged in, the West Bank hasn't really changed in terms of the nature of Israel's operation there, but it's remained at the same threshold, even has become more dangerous as the Israeli security establishment treats it. But at the end of the day, we see that the West Bank remains the arena where, in the absence of its ability to carry out attacks from Gaza, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, utilizing their different assets in the West Bank. And this is mainly in 3 areas in the northern part of the West Bank. We're talking about Jenin, Nablus, those are those 2 towns that we've been reporting on the most, and Tulkarem is the 3rd. And that's where this activity by Israeli forces took place today against the Tulkarem brigade belonging to the PIJ's Al-Quds brigades. In this operation, managing to eliminate Saeed Jaber, a significant operative in the Tulkarem brigade. And this is one in a string of operations that have been carried out for roughly 2 years now, nearly on a daily basis in the West Bank. And if we're talking about transition from phase 2 and 3 of the IDF in Gaza, so phase 3 is pretty much what the IDF activity in the West Bank looks like. And so if we're looking at perhaps looking for similarities or what to expect moving forward to phase 3 in Gaza, it is exactly this model, the model that's going on in the West Bank, intelligence-based operation to take out a cell of terrorists that have been carrying out a string of shooting attacks against civilians and military personnel adjacent to the northern part of the West Bank. Ganer, Bat Hefer, those are 2 examples of Israeli communities that have been shot at by this terror cell. So the IDF carrying out another operation to try and thwart different terror activity in the West Bank.
Gentlemen, stay with us. This is a very concerning scenario that you are outlining. We're going to come back to more on the security front. Right now, though, the saying goes that the devil is in the details. Well, sometimes the solution is in the details too. The Axios news site is reporting that the US has presented new language in the current proposal for a ceasefire for hostages deal between Israel and Hamas. The Biden administration is pushing for a 3-phase deal, and the new wording of the proposal is an attempt to ensure the ceasefire makes it to the 2nd stage. Last week, Benjamin Netanyahu walking back the proposal on the table, saying he was interested in a partial deal which would see the return of some of the hostages. He later recommitted to the original proposal after being slammed by mediators and the public. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini breaks it all down.
As more and more of Gaza turns into rubble, a potential ceasefire for hostages deal between Israel and Hamas is hanging by a thread. In the latest attempt to bring Hamas to agree to the deal currently on the table, the Biden administration has reworded part of the proposal, according to the Axios news site, focusing on the negotiations between Hamas and Israel in the first stage of the deal, setting the conditions for the second of 3 stages. On Saturday, Hamas denied seeing any significant changes in the deal.
There has been no real progress at the end of the aggression negotiations. And what is quoted by the American administration is to put pressure on Hamas to accept the Israeli ceasefire proposal without modification. It's a way to beautify the image of this ugly administration. Once again, Hamas is ready to deal positively with any proposal that secures a permanent ceasefire, a comprehensive withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and a serious swap deal.
Hamas insists that any deal must end the war with a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Israel says that cannot happen, and its goal continues to be to fully remove Hamas's governing capabilities in the Strip. After all, Israel can't accept another October 7th massacre, it says. An attack that Hamas has said it will repeat until Israel is eradicated. On Saturday night, tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets once again in a repeated, desperate attempt to get the Israeli government to reach a deal with Hamas, to bring back the hostages, and to call for early elections.
This morning we learned that the Biden administration is taking action to renew the hostage deal negotiation. The one thing standing between us and our loved ones is Netanyahu's stubborn insistence to not end this war as a part of a deal. Continuation of this war means the murder of the hostages by Israeli's government. The blood is on your hands.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel supports the ceasefire for hostages deal that's on the table. and that the ball is now in Hamas's court. Over 120 hostages are still believed to be kept in Gaza.
So for more reaction, we now welcome Gil Dickman, cousin of Carmel Gat, one of the hostages held in captivity for nearly 9 months now. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Gil, thank you so much. We so appreciate your time today. Day 268 of this war. The nation's waiting for word on the hostages held in Gaza for nearly 9 months. You and your family still waiting for word on Carmel and all the hostages. So how are you feeling about these latest apparent efforts to secure a deal? It sounds like the deal is hanging by a thread.
That's right. We're very tense, I must say. We don't really know whether this means that the deal is on the way or not. We have learned that not to be too hopeful, but from what we're seeing, the ball is at Hamas's court. That's the reality as we perceive it right now. There is a deal on the table. Israel has put it, the US is behind it, Qatar is behind it, Egypt is behind it, and we're all waiting for the horrible terrorist Yahya Sinwar. And the world should know this, that Yahya Sinwar holds the keys to end this horrible tragedy, to get the hostages home, and right now he decides not to do that. The world should know this, and this is why we were so outraged by the fact that the Prime Minister of Israel just last week has interviewed about this issue and said that he might agree only to a partial deal or whatever. This, I think, is something that turns the world against Israel, and the world must know that we as Israelis are willing to do whatever it needs to get the hostages back. And if we don't, that means that we are in charge of the fact that they're still there. I think right now that the IDF understands that this part of the war is finished, and we have to do whatever we can to get the hostages back. The world should know that Israel is willing to do whatever it needs, and that Yahya Sinwar is to blame for the fact that we are still at war right now.
There's no doubt that the ball is in the court of Hamas right now. What then, though, do you make of reports that the US is changing the wording on the proposal to try to secure a ceasefire hostage deal? Does it give some glimmer of hope? Your thoughts?
I think that means that we are in a negotiation, and that's a good thing. That means that the US has heard what's important to Hamas and is trying to change the deal in a way that will make it easier for them to accept this offer. I hope that we get positive reaction from Hamas very, very soon. And positive reaction is not nearly enough. We are looking for a deal. And that would be the only way to get the hostages back. That would be the only way to put an end to this tragedy. I know that some people on many parts of the world dream that they can end this war without getting the hostages back. No way that this war would end without getting the hostages back. And I know that if we see the U.S. is changing some of the wording, well, that means that there is a place for negotiation, and that means that we are seeing a path forward, and there is a path forward. We have to do whatever we can, and the Israeli government must do whatever it can so Hamas accepts this offer and we finally reach a deal. We've been waiting for way too long, and people feel like the government hasn't done enough yet because the hostages aren't here. I can't say with all honesty that I understand that our government has done all that it could do to make sure that Hamas accept this offer. Right now, we have a chance, it might be the last chance, to do whatever is possible to make sure that Hamas accept this offer. If it takes a change in wording, do so. Just get them to accept this offer. We need to see our hostages. They're running out of time.
There's no doubt about it. Time is of the essence. Indeed, and Gil, we've seen these rallies across the country calling for a deal to be secure, to get all the hostages home, amongst other demands. We know emotions are obviously high. And we heard rescued hostage Andrei Kozlov talking about how it felt when he was in captivity and he saw footage of these protests. I'm getting goosebumps as I'm describing this to you, what it meant to him to see the outpouring of support. So what is your sense of the impact of these rallies, knowing that Carmel potentially could be seeing footage of these rallies in real time too?
Yeah, Andre was telling about Almog Meir Jan, who was a hostage right near him, who saw a picture of himself being held in a rally or in a protest. And that means the world. This is exactly what we're doing it for. You know, I know from Carmel's sister-in-law, Yarden Roman, who was also held hostage. She told us when she came back that she heard my voice on the radio and that she knew that we were trying our best and fighting to get her back because she heard us. And she knew that there is a hostages square. She knew that there are protests and rallies and that people are praying to get her back. Sending these messages across the unbelievable border and to the darkest places in the tunnels in which Hamas is holding the hostages. It's the most important thing for us. That means that we're doing something, that we are giving hope to the hostages wherever they may be, that we're fighting for them. And it also gives me goosebumps to know that whenever we are on air, whenever we're talking, whenever we're holding pictures, like the picture I'm holding right now, the picture of Carmel, the fact that she could actually see this and understand that we're fighting for her, that means the world. And it should mean the world to you too, because if you come to the rallies, to the protests, if you pray, if you hold the pictures of the hostages and they might be able to see you, that means that you are giving them hope and you are giving them strength, the strength they need to go through another day in these horrible places. And whenever you do such a thing, you get the day in which they will come back to us one day closer. That means a lot, and that means that you have to keep on coming, to keep on protesting, to keep on rallying to get the hostages back. Once our leaders understand that that's what we want, they will actually do it.
Gil Dickman, the nation is with you and all the families of the hostages. We hope for good news about Carmel and all the hostages. Thank you so much for being with us on the Rundown. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good evening.
And as the IDF retaliatory operation inside Gaza is likely winding down in the coming weeks, the focus turns to what could happen next across the northern front between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Red alert sirens sounding earlier in the day once again. So for more, we cross live to our correspondent Robert Swift. He joins us from northern Israel. And Rob, let's start with an I-24 News exclusive update on communication between Iran and the Hezbollah terror group in southern Lebanon. Tell us more. What is the latest?
Right, so this story originates with Western intelligence sources, and it's been corroborated by one of our colleagues who spoke with Israeli intelligence sources to get their take on it. And what it's understood is that interceptions have picked up hints that Hezbollah has been applying pressure to its Iranian backers, essentially asking for more money and reinforcements, more armaments, in order to restock its arsenals and its barracks after the casualties which it has received at the hands of Israel over the last 8 or so months. Now, the casualty figures from Hezbollah are well over 300 at this stage, with 3 more names added to that list. So it's understood that Hezbollah is taking serious casualties, but it's also maybe an indication that the organization itself is for want of a better phrase, willing to go. It's up for a fight with Israel. It's understood that there is some pressure within Hezbollah itself, applying pressure towards the chairman Nasrallah in order to encourage him to escalate the conflict with Israel. However, at the minute, and based on his past behavior throughout this war, it does appear that Nasrallah is himself cautious to go down that route.
Meanwhile, on the ground, red alert sirens sounding in recent hours in northern Israel. What update can you share for us this hour, Rob?
So it has been quiet here for about the last 3 hours, but there was a burst of activity in the hours immediately preceding that. Now, we are still receiving some bits of information from those various attacks that took place. There are reports of casualties related to a drone attack which took place in the northern Golan Heights earlier this afternoon. Some reports of potentially up to 9 people wounded, 2 in a serious condition. We are looking for additional information to corroborate this, but this is initial reports which are just coming out now. This follows several drones which appeared to cross into Israeli airspace in the northern Golan Heights, with the IDF saying one of them came down and exploded in that area. There was also additional attacks towards Metula, scene of frequent attacks which had several anti-tank missiles fired at it, as well as a number of other more minor incidents across the border.
Thank you so much. Correspondent Robert Swift updating us there live from northern Israel. Thank you, Rob. And still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. Doron, I want to put all these developments in context. We started off talking about an elusive deal. It isn't happening right now. We heard from Gil Dickman waiting for word on Carmel, his cousin, who has been held hostage for nearly 9 months, desperate for some kind of breakthrough. We are hearing about communication between Iran and Hezbollah right now, very concerning in terms of an injection of money, a call for more money. And there is this concern that as the fighting winds down in the Gaza Strip, the focus will turn to the northern front. Your assessment on all these developments?
Well, first of all, the chain of events that everybody were hoping, the U.S. for sure, was an end to a war, a prolonged ceasefire, hostage deal, and this affects and opens the windows of opportunity to some diplomatic progress with Hezbollah. This was the context. Now, we don't have an end for the war in Gaza, and we don't have a hostage deal. So we still have this intense fighting with Hezbollah. Hezbollah paid dearly in the last few months. We have to personnel kit, more than 400, weaponry cache, air defense positions, leaders. So of course they need the money, they need the weaponry. They are looking, for example, for anti-tank missile. They don't need a line of sight. It will help them because we succeeded to push them away a little bit from the border, this is our aim. So of course they need this help. Understand it. We hit only Hezbollah targets. We don't hit Lebanese infrastructure, though Hezbollah hits Israeli targets. So we kept this distinction until now, and this can change if the war escalates and the situation has no resolution.
So it brings us to the next question about what could transpire across that northern front if there isn't a diplomatic solution. Does Israel strike first?
I think Israel, in a certain moment, would have to make a decision because Israel is in a situation which is unbearable. The citizens are out of their homes, their farms. Students would not start in September. I would estimate the year. So this is a situation that Israel can't accept and can't contain. The question when, if, and how. If it's a surprise attack, what kind attack, whether it's in sync with the U.S. I think it's important to be in sync with the U.S. as we go forward, because we might need the help of the U.S. We did hear from the Iranians that they say if it's a full-blown war in Lebanon, they might decide to join in. So we need the U.S. support here. So this is in this equation we have to consider all those things, but a war is still an option.
Ariel, part of the war goals that we heard Benjamin Netanyahu talking about at the start of this broadcast included making sure that the residents who've been evacuated from the north and the south of the country throughout this war would get to go back home realistically. What kind of timeframes are we looking at here?
Well, I think before timeframes, we need to look at what is the definition of the conditions that will allow them to return. Because if the conditions are that there isn't an imminent threat right on the border, then in the absence of a diplomatic solution, a diplomatic agreement, a commitment by Hezbollah to withdraw its forces in accordance with UN Resolution 1701, which currently prohibits them from carrying weapons south of the Litani River. This is from 2006, but since then they've been disregarding them. So the question is whether their presence on the border, that deems as the situation safe for the residents of the north to return. I know for certain that the residents of the north saying that they're not willing to accept that situation, but the question is whether the leaders of Israel are. And if they are willing to do that, then we can look at a time frame that is not too far in the future. But the question is, as long as there are Hezbollah forces, we're talking about thousands of special forces along Israel-Lebanon border, as long as they are there, the situation will not be safe for the residents of the north, strictly speaking, from the experience of October 7th. That changed the reality, at least in the eyes of the residents. As far as the leadership is concerned, that could be different. And so if we're talking about bringing them back with Hezbollah forces on the border, that can happen the day after there's a ceasefire. But if Israel decides that as long as they are south of the Litani River, as long as Hezbollah special forces are on the border with Israel, and that is not safe, then Israel will need to push away that threat. Currently, it is trying to do that in diplomatic means, but were that to fail, Israel would still be in a situation where it has an imminent threat along its borders.
I think we have a very simple end game. The precondition can allow citizens back, and this is the resolution 1701. We have to admit that we do succeed to push them away from the border. They are not in the same. It's not the same condition that was pre-7th of October, but we need to really guarantee it, establish it, and force it by fire either by resolution or by fire after some kind of agreement is done. The Litani border is a precondition for us bringing our citizens back.
And just a quick reminder, these negotiations aren't between Israel and Lebanon. This is a terror organization that Israel is trying to find agreements with for it to cease its reason for existence, and that's targeting Israel. I'm not sure that the diplomatic avenue is what Hezbollah is looking for right now.
It sounds like that is, in fact, the case. Gentlemen, thank you both so much. Appreciate your insights. Ariel Osran, you're going to be staying in studio with us. Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital, thank you so much for being with us. Always appreciate your insights here on The Rundown. Now, further afield, a moderate lawmaker will face Iran's supreme leader's protege in a runoff presidential election next week, after the country's interior ministry said no candidate had secured enough votes in the first round of voting. And despite calls by the supreme leader for the people to go out and vote, Friday's election saw the lowest ever poll turnout in the history of the Islamic Republic. More in this report by our Middle East correspondent, Harel Horv.
The votes are in as Iran heads for a runoff in its presidential elections.
None of the candidates managed to win an absolute majority of the votes. Therefore, the first and second candidates with the highest number of votes will be announced to the Guardian Council.
Friday's second round will see little-known reformist Masoud Pezeshkian square off against hardline former nuclear negotiator Saeed Jalili. The first round came down to a tight race, with Pezeshkian securing 42% of the votes, compared to Jalili's 38%.
Election day is a time of great joy and excitement for us Iranians. The people's vote will shape the country's future for the coming years. The longevity, stability, reputation, and honor of the Islamic Republic depends on the people's participation.
Khamenei hoped for a high turnout to boost his regime's legitimacy, but instead got a record low, 39.9% voter turnout, the lowest in the history of the Islamic Republic. Pezeshkian will need to draw more voters to the polls on Friday in order to contend with Jalili, who's expected to get the votes of the other hardliner candidate, who finished third, Mohammad Khalibaf. Pezeshkian will need to prove that he is more than just another government-approved candidate.
God willing, we will try to have friendly relations with all countries except Israel. Hijab is something that we need to address, according to the law, but no inhuman or invasive behaviour should be made against our girls, daughters and mothers.
Power in Iran ultimately lies with the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, with the president running the country's day-to-day. And so the results of Friday's runoff aren't expected to bring any major shift in Iran's policies, from its nuclear program or its network of proxies across the Middle East. But a victory for Pezeshkian could influence, if only slightly, the tone of Iran's policies and perhaps also tensions with the West. But Jalili's win would signal an even more antagonistic turn in the Islamic Republic's foreign and domestic policy.
So for more reaction and insight, it's a pleasure to welcome Camelia Intakabifad, the editor-in-chief at the Independent Persian, joining us from New York. Camelia, thank you so much for your time. Let's start with the runoff presidential election. The sole moderate up against a former member of the Revolutionary Guard. So how do you see this playing out next week?
Thank you very much, dearest Benita, for hosting me, and good evening to your viewers. I am not seeing, to be honest with you, much differences between Saeed Jalili and Masoud Pezeshkian. Maybe Pezeshkian tried to elaborate himself to be recognized as a reformist, but even he admitted that he is a kind of conservative reformist. It's not making that clear. Finally, he's here or there. And the next Friday, if as it is, and if the supporter of Qalibaf and Mustafa Pur Mohammadi wants to vote for Saeed Jalili can be at the front. And unless these supporters of Pezeshkian can put themselves together and make this kind of the Jalili is the evil and Pezeshkian is an angel, to make that big fears in the public, to increase the participants. I'm seeing even the sleeping cells of Mohammad Javad Zarif, who has been created during President Obama's time in the United States, are so actively campaigning for Mr. Pezeshkian, for Democrat, let's say. They are still favoring have these people who this cell were working, having a channel with Tehran rather than with Jalili. But to be frank with you, my own personal opinion, I could say at least the conservatives are much more braver than the reformists. If they want to do something, if they want to talk, at least they would talk. And the example was the Rais's time. We heard he was negotiating with Americans with no hesitations, and they were expressing themselves clearly, not like the reformists. They are covering itself behind of the nice words, but they were acting differently. Both are worse. But speaking about which one can make differences, none of them. Both of them has been approved by the supreme leader. And we have to remember that there is not a free and fair election. That people has been chosen by the supreme leader.
Right, certainly not a free and fair election indeed. We will be waiting to see how things unfold next week. Meanwhile, Camelia, earlier on in our show, I24 News is reporting that Western intelligence sources have confirmed, Israel confirming these sources, that there's been an interception in communication between Iran and Hezbollah, in which the terror group has been asking for money, and it's a lot of money. What do you make of this report and the timing, given that this presidential race as such is still underway?
We have been also taking this report from the I24 News and published at the Independent Persian. That was news breaking. It comes from your side and your source of intelligences. It is so much possible. Yesterday, the Iranian ambassador at the United Nations in New York, he tweeted and threatened Israelis that if they enter to a full-scale war and confrontation with Lebanon, all of the resistant fronts would be entered to a war with Israel. It means they're threatening Israelis, people from Yemen, from Syria, all of them get engaged. Not only like the Gaza, we didn't see the other resistant alliance comes directly to attack Israel, but that was a threat. If this is a threat, Hezbollah needs money, needs equipment, needs logistic people, and who has to pay for this if there is a full-scale war with Israelis? Poor Iranians. And here is another point. Usually Hassan Nasrallah, when he is short with cash, he wants to embarrass his supporters in Iran. We remember that when nuclear deal has been signed, Hassan Nasrallah publicly admitted from his plastic flip-flop down to the food and his kitchen table and all of his people paid by the Iranians. Maybe he was worried their income being cutted after the deal. Now maybe they are also worried after this election. Whoever is the president decided to reopen the negotiations. They want to limit the power of this resistance group or so on. But strongly, I believe anyone become the president is still at the mission and command of the supreme leader. And this resistant front is very important for the supreme leader. And Iran and the whole these proxy groups are at the very critical time, since there is a war between Israel and Gaza, and since Iran and Israel 2 times attempt to attack each other, and there were certain number of the missiles has been shooted to each other's souls, still there is a potential of escalation between Iran and Israel. And Iran needs this proxy, needs these people. And maybe they were taking advantages to drain as much cash and assets of the Iranian possible, which understand that Iran is so desperately in need to keep their alliance and also have them at the backside of them.
Fascinating developments indeed. We certainly will be watching. Thank you so much, as always, for your reaction and insight. Camelia Intakabifad, the editor-in-chief at the Independent Persian, live from New York. Thank you, as always.
Thank you.
And still in studio, Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran, your take on the extent that this report suggests Iran is playing right now in terms of what it's doing to support the next moves out of Hezbollah. Your understanding of what is happening right now?
Yeah, Benita, this reporting from our Matthias and Baran, I24 News French channel, comes as we are seeing more and more reports laying out how Tehran is currently contemplating how to utilize its proxies if and when a war between Israel and Hezbollah a wider war were to break out in southern Lebanon. We have this report. We also have other reporting from I24 News Channel in Hebrew saying that Iran has increased the pace of supplying aerial defense systems, advanced aerial defense systems, to Hezbollah, as Hezbollah seems to be gearing up for a potential wider war with Israel. So on the one hand, we're seeing Iran contemplating how to utilize its proxies. On the other hand, we are seeing Nasrallah said in a speech just the other week that the Iraqi militias, the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, had offered to send fighters to Lebanon. We declined. There was reporting that Iran is actually discussing whether to send pro-Iranian militias from Iraq and elsewhere to Lebanon. So this comes in line with those reports that the Iranian axis, they're contemplating how what's going to happen, and in each scenario, what of its assets, which assets to use: Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and Hezbollah. There's a wide array of proxies that Iran can activate in a moment's notice.
A wide array indeed. Disturbing indeed. Thank you so much, as always, for your updates and your insights. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran, thank you. Turning now to the US presidential race, and with the first debate done and dusted, Democrats are racing to salvage whatever they can of their party as President Joe Biden faces tremendous criticism from within his party about his performance. More in this report by our Emmanuel Honora.
The running murmurs have now become loud cries. President Biden's debate performance against Republican candidate Donald Trump has sent the Democratic Party into a panic. The discourse on Biden's age shifted as the party urgently tries to find a solution to save itself ahead of the election in November, to the point that even the president shared his thoughts.
I know I'm not a young man. State the obvious. I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. I don't debate as well as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth. I know right from wrong. And I know how to do this job. I know how to get things done. And I know, like millions of Americans know, when you get knocked down, you get back up.
The sudden jolt to reality regarding the president's age, but also his actual condition, has raised multiple scenarios for the Democrats going forward, none of which are easy.
As far as the Democratic Party is concerned, the concerns they're expressing are behind the scenes. They're off the record. They're private. They're going to have to go very public, and they're going to have to get a delegation of impressive people together, including former presidents, for example, to go to the White House and convince Biden not to run.
But so far, no heavyweight official has taken the lead to tell Biden to step aside. In fact, some of the potential incumbents as replacements have taken Biden's staunch defense following the debate.
But it's the performance everyone's talking about, Governor. You have to address the performance.
Would you be willing to take that ticket?
Everyone's talking about the performance.
I'll
never turn my back on
Are you
President
ready to take on Donald Trump?
Senator, I spent a lot of time with him. I know Joe Biden. I know what he's accomplished in the last 3.5 years. I know what he's capable of, and I know his vision, and I have no trepidation.
And earlier today, the president said himself it was not his best performance. But there are 3 things that were true yesterday before the debate that are still true today. Let's level set on this, all right? First, the stakes of this race could not be higher. Second, the contrast in this election could not be more stark. And third, we believe in our president, Joe Biden, and we believe in what he stands for.
With so much uncertainty behind the Democratic Party, it's going to need more than a second successful debate from Biden to get back on track. In the meantime, the whole world is watching.
So for more reaction, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Mark Schulman, the editor-in-chief at History Central, a columnist at Newsweek. Mark, thank you so much for being here. The damage control is well underway. The presidential debate was difficult to watch in parts. One gets uncomfortable seeing someone battling the way President Joe Biden did. Your take on what happened? What went wrong?
I think he just wasn't up to it. There's no question in my mind for what went wrong. We have all sorts of excuses. We can say that there was a bad day, cold medicine, everything you can think of. But the performance was not a bad debate performance. It was terrible. He fell apart completely. He couldn't answer one sentence. He couldn't put one thought together. He couldn't come back with one thing that Trump said. It was a total disaster. And any attempt at damage control, I'm afraid, is very problematic at this point, because it's not so much, yes, he's better than Trump for a million different reasons. Yes, Democrats would prefer him than Trump. He might possibly win against Trump at this point. Very unlikely at this point. The reality is, if it's such an important election, the time has come for him to understand the fact that at 81 years old, to begin with, he was too old to run for re-election. Democrats mostly understand that. I'm, together on Twitter with various people and hearing back and forth. The rank and file all understand that. The political leadership is still sort of holding back a little bit. What they're saying in private, we have no idea. But the argument that's being made, like Kamala Harris made, yes, the difference is tremendous. Yes, it's the most important election. Okay, you take those 2 things. What comes next? We need a solution. It's difficult at the moment. Finding a solution right now will be a bit chaotic, to say the least, because there's only really 2 possibilities. He has to agree to step aside, which, as we all know, when we have elderly parents, it's very hard to convince them to give up the car or whatever else it might be. It's very hard to tell someone who's the most powerful person in the world, I'm sorry, you're too old, you can't do this again. Maybe you can keep on doing it, but you can't be elected. He's had a history of always coming back. That's sort of part of his motto. I always come back. They always underestimate me. But there's some things we just don't come back from. We get older all the time. And the question the American people are going to ask, okay, this was this night. Maybe it was only one night. Maybe it's not going to happen for another few weeks. But he's going to get older. And you don't get better as you get older in these circumstances. So it's really going to be up to him to decide to step aside. And the Democrats, if he does that, will have a chaotic period.
Right.
They'll have to choose between a couple of different possibilities. They'll be fighting within the party. But in the end, I think they'll come together with somebody. All the polls show that generic Democrat beats Trump. So it's Biden who doesn't because of the age issue.
And also one wonders who has his ear, so to speak, to convince him that it's time to walk away. It may well not be Joe Biden, it may be somebody else, but clearly somebody needs to convince him to make that decision. He's the one that needs to decide. It brings me to my next question from the perspective of the US policy on Israel, which is so sensitive and so important right now. What is the best case scenario that could unfold? Briefly, please.
Best case scenario. It's hard. That's really hard to know. I mean, the best case scenario is a quick decision. Someone comes to the presidency. All the possibilities who are potential Democratic nominees are all pro-Israel. No one's going to be quite like Biden because he's from a different generation. There'll be a different generation. It'll be a little more difficult in some ways. But every single one of them, whether it's the governor of California, it's the governor of Michigan, whether it's even the governor of Pennsylvania who's Jewish, all of them are pro-Israel in the generic sense of the word. So that won't make any difference. I think our concern right now is what the world sees right now. Is this a dangerous period right now? Is the world, does the Iranians say, America's a bit of turmoil right now. Now would be a good time. So that's a question we don't know. I've heard conflicting views in the Israeli military, whether it's more likely, less likely, hard to know. What we don't need is more uncertainty in these very difficult times, and that's what we have at the moment is more uncertainty, which is certainly not good for any of us.
Certainly, no one needs uncertainty at this juncture. Mark Schulman, editor-in-chief at History Central and a columnist at Newsweek, thank you as always for your insights. We will definitely have you back as the story unfolds. Thank you. And now, a soccer championship final in honor of a fallen soldier from Israel. More in this report from our Fabio Shapiro. Let's take a look.
It's never just a sport, but a reflection of life. Tazus, an organization that promotes sports to young new immigrants in Israel, hosted the final of another soccer championship, but this time with more emotion. Amid the ongoing war in Gaza, the organization honored Master Sergeant Dan Weidenbaum, a reserve soldier from the Iftach Brigade, killed in combat in Gaza on January. The competition's trophy was named after him.
Last league, we have the opportunity for people to sign up as a team or also like individuals, and we came up with this whole team making for individuals that maybe got rejected from other teams, and Dan was part of that in the last league, and actually the team won the last league. Unfortunately and sadly, last a few months ago, we knew that Dan fell in Gaza, and also Tazus is about sportsmanship, about good values, about gathering people together, and we wanted to honor him by doing this league on his name because he actually was a true reflection about all that. This was a great way to honor his name and to honor all our soldiers and to value life, you know.
Adding to the honors, Dan's parents, David and Aviva Weidenbaum, were invited to the event to present the winners with the cup, continuing Dan's legacy.
And also, you know, sadness sometimes, but we have to keep the good side, to remember Dan in all the good things he did. He did a lot of things in 24 years. Somewhere his neshama knew that he has only 24 years to be with us. He liked it also very much to help people, to be with them. He's supposed to start here in Tel Aviv University to learn physiotherapy, also because he felt that sports and helping people when they are injured, and it was really a dream for him to learn that. He never played for to win. He was playing only for the game, to play with the people, to be with people and to play with them.
Dan left many fans who were influenced by him. The Netzach online project was founded by one of his soccer students to memorialize the soldiers who fell in the war. After a tense game, the players of El Mañanero left the field with a 2-0 victory, a glimpse of happiness in these hard times.
It's been amazing. We already played this tournament. We lost in the semifinals 2 years ago, and throughout the year, with all of the things that's been going on with the war, I think it brings us happiness. It brings us happiness that we're doing this for Dan also, and we're really proud of the team, of being here, being in Israel. All of us are Alim Khadashim, so it feels amazing.
The soccer field may at times feel like a battlefield. Players fight together towards a common goal, but when the fight is over, what's left is the love for the sport and companionship. In his death, Dan ordered us to live and continue his dream.
הספורט נותן המון כוח, ופה יש המון, המסר שלנו הוא באמת לחבק אחד את השני, להיות אחד עם השני כמו שדן אהב, והספורט באמת הוא עושה את זה. הוא נותן לא רק כוח בגוף, האנדורפינים והכוח שם, אבל הוא נותן כוח אחד לשני, איך שאתה מקבל את השני, איך אתה נותן לשני, וזה היה ממש מה שדן עשה. אז באמת, תודה.
His legacy lives on. And with that, we wrap up this edition of The Rundown. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for watching.